Hey Mercedes W163 fans, I have a leaky tranny cooler line on my 2002 ML500 with the V8 engine. They get a lot of money for these tranny cooler lines, and I really don't want to pay $300 wait a week and then yank them all off there when I've only got one spot leak in one part of the hose. So it's the hose rubber ends that are nearest the radiator. I'll show you more a close-up in a second, but let me show you what I'm going to use to fix the problem. Okay, this can be all had at O'Reilly's or wherever for probably not more than $20. Okay, what we are using for this repair now is these fuel injection hose clamps. O'Reilly's, at least in the Master Pro, has three sizes, a nice collection of 4 clamps, 13, 15, and 16 size. And basically that equates to the millimeters they'll clamp to. And we're going to want the middle one because I'm using the smaller of the two Gates transmission rated fuel lines. Sorry, it's upside down. Okay, what we're using is only use transmission oil cooler line. It's the only thing that can handle heat. We're using 5/16 of an inch, which fits perfectly over the 9.2 millimeter diameter of the metal hose barb that is left when you take off the bad current stock hardened rubber hose. And we'll show you that in just a moment. But you're going to use these middle-sized clamps, so we're going to use all 4 of those. You can cut off the crimp with any sort of similar rotary Dremel tool. This little guy's here is kind of underpowered, so I'm not really recommending this exact one. Maybe one that has a more powerful than a 5-volt battery on it. One that plugs in would be ideal, of course. And I found it handy to have my Harbor Freight digital caliper because I'm measuring hoses and diameters and all that, and I want to get it real accurate. And I accidentally bought the larger of the two transmission lines. The 3/8 is too big. You really want the 5/16 for the proper fit. I've got me more ATF plus 4, which is made for Chrysler vehicles, but being that it was Daimler Chrysler, this transmission in this Mercedes takes the same ATF as the same exact tranny when it's installed in the Chrysler vehicle. So some little known fact that might save you some money is the Chrysler rear drive vehicles like Jeep Grand Cherokee and Dodge Challenger and all that, those are all the same as the Mercedes transmissions. We've also got our roll of towels. It's a messy job. And we'll go over there and take a look at the where it's leaking. Okay, on the Mercedes, the tranny cooler is on the passenger side of the radiator. Here's the upper fitting, and that goes very down to the bottom. It's metal all the way down. You can see the lower one down there too. Let's expand out. The lower one is dry. That hose, there's no wetness on it at all. That connection is still good. But the one beneath is the one that I'm relating to, and that is leaking. It was leaking right there at that joint, and the hose had obviously dried out. I'm guessing that's the hottest hose. Probably that's the warm tranny fluid coming into the radiator. I'm not 100% sure which line is the in and the out, but it's leaking there and then dripping down to the cross member and spraying out underneath the bottom side of the vehicle, making quite a mess. And we'll go down there and get a close-up down there. The goal is to take this assembly, this upper portion, off the car, and then I can work on it in the garage to attach the new hose piece and to cut off that swedged, crimped connection there. Okay, under the ML here, I have taken loose the sway bar, loosen the sway bar brackets. Right there is the one that's on the frame. Sway bar drops down, you have plenty of room to work. Now, a lot of this video, what I say here is premised upon that your bad rubber section is this forward part. All these same principles would apply in terms of the upgrade and the repair, but it would look different in terms of the layout if it was the lines at the back of the tranny. So on these lines, it's rubber in the front and mainly long metal pieces in the middle, and then more rubber when it goes to the tranny in the back. So you basically have 2 forward rubber pieces and 2 backwards ones. The backwards ones being the one that we can't show you right now that are at the rear of the tranny. But anyhow, I've already cut this off. Let me show you what the crimp looked like. Okay, I used the Dremel tool earlier. Back a little bit here. You can see, basically you just cut through the crimp. Sorry if it's overexposed there. You just take your Dremel tool and you make a cut right along the line here. And I'll try and show you that when I'm doing the other part, when I pull the the main assembly off and put it on the garage floor to work on it. But basically, there's nothing more complex than this is just a fancy factory-made hose clamp. And we're going to be replacing it with a fresh rubber hose that actually fits this tight. It's new, and it's going to be super elastic and then a nice fitting on that barbed metal that's under there. This rubber is super hard. For all I know, these are original hoses. I couldn't really tell exactly. But you want it to fit tight on there, and then we're going to put on those fuel injection hose clamps that are far better than a worm gear clamp. They're much stronger, much more even pressure, and 2 of those side by side will totally replicate this factory crimp setup here. And we're just replacing the part of the hose that's bad. And here we're blessed in Texas with no corrosion, so the metal parts of the tranny cooler lines are in perfect condition. If you have corrosion and rust, you might as well just replace the whole line. But we don't have to do that, so we're going to save a little money, time, and effort by just replacing the rubber. Okay, I'll pull that off there and then show you. Okie doke. Now just to show you how this rubber is not, why it's leaking, is it's super loose on there. I pull it just readily on and off, not any effort at all to pull it on and off. I slipped that new section of hose on there, and I'm here to tell you it was all I could do to get it off. Those little barbs grabbed that puppy and would not let it go. So I just take my word for it. That's going to fit on there because the idea of the hose is like 7.9 millimeters. This is 9.2. So I know some people who watch this repair on YouTube or on the Mercedes forums are going to say, oh, it's just going to blow off as soon as you get up to temperature and pressure. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think so. Because those barbs grabbing this hose so much, I accidentally put it all the way on. Took me a lot of effort to get it off, pulling as hard as I could and wiggling it. So once you have clamps on there, it's not going to go anywhere. It'll be as solid as this factory crimp. Because what happens is these hoses dry out and shrink or change in size, and then the crimp is no longer strong. You know, it's going to, basically it never changes shape, but the rubber hose does. And then everything's loose and you start leaking slowly. It's a seep, and then it's a dribble, and pretty soon it's more, and then it sprays and breaks. So hopefully this can help you get it done affordably. We'll show you how. Let me pull the other part off the car, and then we'll get a closer up of that. Okay, now I've taken this loose and removed the clamp down there from the other line. Fish it up and through. Ta-da! And that's right where it was leaking, right there. Once again, that's the upper line. Yours could be the other one, or maybe one of the lines at the back. But we'll cut that crimp off there and replace this hose with proper brand new hose and 2 fuel injection clamps there, and then 2 more down there once it's back on the car. And we might want to keep in mind how it sits on the vehicle, so you can put those clamps on where you will be able to access for retightening purposes later. You wouldn't want to get this on the car and then have the clamps be in the wrong location so you couldn't tighten them. So I'm going to pay careful attention to that factor. Recommend you do the same. Okay, the way this sits, I'm going to have to orient the bolt heads to the clamps on the down side, because if I put them on the up side, you'll never be able to tighten them because the other hose sits right there. This is the clamp that holds the 2 metal hose, coolant hoses in, cooler hoses in alignment. So it would be a bad plan to face the adjusting clamp bolt up. I want to face them down. And now I'll get to cut that off, and then we'll fit our new hose, and we'll be golden. Okay, got the die grinder, made the cuts opposite sides of the crimped fitting. And then you're just going to put a screwdriver in there and pry it away from the hose. And that thing was so loose and dripping fluid, as I cut through it, you could see the fluid bubbling out. So this hose is way beyond its prime. And that's why these factory assemblies go bad. So we're just, and I got to put the camera down to get that all the way off there, but it just peels away. And then you pull the hose off the barbed fitting. It comes off readily because the hose is hardened and no longer fits tight without that swedge connection, which is why it was leaking. So we are going to be fixing that and fixing it well and properly. And I'll show you what it looks like when it's put together the right way. Sorry I don't have a chest cam to get good shots. I got to set things down, do them, and then tell you what I did. Okay, here's the swedge fitting gone. And here's how bad that hose is, how hardened the rubber is. It just slides willy-nilly on and off that. I mean, like, no effort's required to pull it off. The fresh hose, once it gets on those barbs, you will not be able to hardly pull it off. As I said earlier on, I couldn't even get the new hose off when I accidentally tried to test fit it, so I'm not going to make that mistake again. But there's going to be enough width there for 2 clamps side by side. You can see that. So you'll get all the same clamping strength of that swedge fitting in a clamp that you can adjust. Alrighty, so that will be the ticket. All you're going to need to do is arrange it so that you can get to the bolt head afterwards, because while you don't want to over tighten these, you do want to check their tightness after maybe a few hundred miles of driving, or a week, or maybe 10 days or something. And then just make sure that they're tight. Kind of give them a little more, maybe another turn on the bolt to get them seating into the rubber more fully. Just like you can see here on the original swedge, it's got those indentations where the swedging goes in there and pushes on the rubber, and just exactly like a clamp being tightened properly, but not over tightened. Alrighty. Here's another eye-opening view of why the hose on the left, the stock hose, started to leak, and the one on the right, the new hose, will be fine. Left side measures 9.8 millimeters, the old hose. The metal tubing at the barb portion is only 9.2 millimeters, so that's why it was leaking, is it was loose. It hardened and actually expanded due to the ATF heat and migration and changing the rubber. On the right side, 8.5 millimeters, which explains why when you push it on there as a test, you can't hardly pull it off, because the barbs grab it, being that it's expanding almost a millimeter, and then sinking into the barb, sink into the rubber surface on the inside of the hose. So I just thought I'd show you that. The outside too, the old hose is swollen to 16 millimeters, and the new hose is only 14.2 millimeters. So basically the old hose hardens and expands, and then it becomes loose on the fittings, and you have your leaks. Let's fix that. We're going to measure for length for length, and cut an identical length. Alrighty, here we are. Correct length hose cut. Just made it a tiny bit longer because I can always cut it under the car if need be before I attach that end. And here is our connection. We have 2 fuel injection clamps side by side that are exactly the width of the length of the internal hose barbed end of the metal cooler line. That is not going to come off. 10 men couldn't pull that apart right now. And I did not over tighten the clamps. The cool part is with these clamps, you don't really need to like crank on them. You just kind of get them down and snug, and they're very tight. However, I do not know until I place this back on the radiator and kind of bolt it up, or at least hold it in position, where these, it's impossible to tell exactly where those are going to end up. And it does matter on this particular part of the cooler line, because I've got the radiator hose right there, the face of the radiator, all kinds of stuff in the way. So there might be only one spot where they can be easily accessed for tightening or loosening, and I want to make sure. That's why I'm going to check before I go bolting it all on. I recommend one of these little mini wrenches. It's a Craftsman. These mini wrenches are pretty handy, 7 millimeter, so I can just get to those and tighten them easily from the side. No need to get a screwdriver in there. All right, let's go see how it bolts up. What a huge difference. I'm so thrilled at this upgrade here. And that nasty old hose can go bye-bye for good. And we didn't spend $300 or wait a week for the parts to get here. Alright. Alrighty. Yes. And, brother, okay. Or There it is. Let me do that here in just a minute. Okay. So they need to be going the other way, and then you could tighten them like that. Put it on there, and you go like that. And you tighten, or you just. I'm glad I checked this on the vehicle because these clamps are headed the wrong way. What I really wanted was them to head so that I could, pardon me while I adjust here, where I could get up here in between in this open area and tighten the heads that way. So you can see I'm going to have to turn them around on that assembly and then locate them in a different spot. So they basically have to get turned around. So there you go. It's good to check these things ahead of time. Theoretical when it's off the car, reality when it's on the car. And that will give me room to turn the wrench, turn the ratchet, and tighten or loosen those clamps. And truly, it's only be needed once they break in a tiny bit. You just want to leave that option and be really short-sighted to put it on the car and then not be able to get to the fasteners later on. Alright, so there you have it. Lesson learned. Let's turn them around and we'll finish this up. Alrighty, now the clamps are turned around and there is perfect amount of room up there to reach up there with a ratchet right in here and tighten those clamp bolts if ever needed. When I turned the clamps around, just for fun, I had to pull them off. And I tried tugging on the hose to try and get it off the barb fitting with no clamp on there at all. Nothing doing. And those clamps had only been on there for maybe 10 minutes. So already the rubber in the hose had formed, along with the braid on the inside of the rubber, to totally suck itself to that barb on the end of the metal line. So with these clamps on there, I just don't see any way this could fail. I think it's good to go. I would just check them to make sure they're tight after a little break-in period and then be on there till Laura comes back. Alrighty. So I'll show you the other one connected in just a second, then we'll start it up. Also, don't forget your hollow bolt here, if you're doing this line, of course. And you got your two sealing washers, one behind, one between the bolt and the banjo fitting. Real important to have those on there. You're not going to find them anywhere else other than a Mercedes dealer. So don't lose that stuff. Also, this clamp, not insignificant. This plastic clamp will hold those two rigid lines in proper alignment. And you want to keep them that way. So you see that little clean spot there on the line I did not fix. And we're going to reach down there off camera and clip this thing on there to maintain the lines in proper orientation. Alright. Okay, you can see the ATF seeping out of the open line. I'm blessed it's not pouring out more vigorously than that, but it's definitely a slow but steady seep. So I was studying how this hose is going to go on here, and I think the clamps are best with them on the bolts on the right side. That puts the bolt, the adjustment between the oil pan and the cooler lines and above the sway bar. So there's no way getting around it. The sway bar will be a little bit in the way later, but I don't think it'll be a problem. I will check it before I do a final tightening just to be 100% sure. But that's going to slide on there just like that. And I will kind of do a forecast because I don't want to get those on there. As I said before, it's going to be tight to get it off. And like that. Measure twice, cut once is the carpenter's adage. Best applied here too.